Welcome to the Beer Before Glory podcast. I'm your host, Justin Crosley.
And I'm Matt Brennelson.
And we are here to talk all things beer with you, as always. And this week's topic, Matt, they've all been good. And I think I probably say they're my favorite every time, but this one this is really my favorite topic right now.
This is the one that will set us apart from all other podcasts.
I think you're right, because today we're talking New Zealand hops, which is, I think, every brewer's favorite hop right now. I know that they're my favorite hops to drink, and we've got a great panel of guests from New Zealand, because why would we talk to anybody else about New Zealand varieties of hops and New Zealand hop growing? So joining us today is Brent McGlashen. He's a hop grower in New Zealand, I believe a 5th generation grower. Is that right, Brent?
Yeah, that's me. Been around the sticks for a while now, Justin. Yeah.
All right. Well, you know a little something.
Quite young. He's really quite young, actually.
I think everybody in New Zealand looks young to me. You guys are so relaxed that y'all age so well. It's amazing. Right next to Brent there is Dr. Ron Beatson, who's been working in plant and food research for 50 years in New Zealand. Welcome, Dr. Ron.
Thanks very much there, Justin.
It's good to have you. And then next to Dr. Ron is Lauren Yap, and she works with New Zealand hops. She's a quality and grower liaison over there. And she worked extensively in the Pacific Northwest. So you're like a good liaison between our hemisphere and yours, right?
Yep, both worlds.
Perfect. Well, why don't we start with the basics, which is what you're drinking. We got to know what's in your glass right there, Brent.
Well, this one here is one that was made specially for Dr. Ron's 50th. Doesn't he look
nice? Great? He does.
And so that one was produced by a local brewery, Sprig and Fern. And they actually, the hop that's in here is a Rewalker hop. It's a green hop. And it was picked from our field. Tracy, the brewer, actually came out right on harvest, and she said, right, let's see what you got for me this year, Brent. So we walked out into the fields, and I said, I left this crop specifically till last. And I said, righto, Tracy, what do you think of this one? I'm brewing with that. When am I brewing with it? And I said, well, it's going to be ready in about 5 days. And then she said, but I've got a meeting in 5 days. I said, yeah, you'll be meeting us on the farm to pick up these hops. And
wow.
So she did, yeah. And that's what we're drinking. And
just a bit as a bit of an interest, this hop, this beer, is Tracy Banner, the brewer at Sprig and Fern. She's entered it into a NZ IPA challenge, which is going to be held in Queenstown, if you know where that is, and some of you and you podcast people. So that's taking place in a week's time. So it should be a lot of fun.
That'll bring together about the top 20 or 30 brewers in New Zealand, and it's getting quite a recognised challenge now. So it's really neat. Yeah.
Oh, well, I wish you luck. It'd be cool to have your anniversary beer rock that challenge. That'd be good.
Yeah. Cheers.
So I wanted us to start. I mean, Dr. Ron, so since you've been doing this for 50 years now, I thought that maybe you could walk us through just, a little bit of the history of New Zealand hops. But start, of course, with, what it is that you do. What is the plant and food research organization that you work with? And just kind of, give us a little bit of your background that way. And then I thought you could talk about what New Zealand hops were like when you started and where we are today. Just give us a little synopsis.
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best there, Justin. Plant and Food Research is it's a government based company, and the shareholder, the main shareholder in our company is the government, and but we have our own board of directors, and also have to turn a profit, basically. So it's sort of semi-commercial, if you like. So we pride ourselves on the fact we work very closely with horticultural industries and also annual crop industries as well. So our site here in Maute Wika is right in the heart of the hop growing area. It's one of 14 sites of plant food. We've got 1,000 people working in our organisation, from right up in the far north of the North Island right down to the bottom of the South Island. And we've also got offices overseas as well. We've got one, in fact, we've got one who works in Portland. We're sort of, we think globally, if you like. And so that's the company. And our research is, it's often touted as a plant breeding company. And so we work a lot in the field of genetics and plant breeding across a wide range of crops. One of which, of course, is hops. And so some of our other major crops are apples and kiwi fruit are the two big ones, plus a lot of annual crops as well, including barley and potatoes and other crops as well. So, but of course, we're here to talk about hops, so I better carry on with it. So I've been working since 1971 for our organisation, and it's had various guises during that time, been called different names. But I've always been based here in Maute Wika, and in fact, we had a celebration of my 50 years last week, which is kind of nice for them to all recognise it. And as I said, the beer was made for that function, and also for distribution for the IPA challenge as well. But I've been working in, I got my PhD in the States, and when I came back in the early 80s, I started working on hops and was based at the site. So there's been a lot of changes. Back at that time, the crop was pretty much I would say cottage industry, just coming out of cottage industry stage. So in other words, domestic consumption, a little bit of exports, but not, it was very much in its infancy in terms of its marketing organisation side of it. But over the years, the industry's grown. I think it was around, there's only 200 hectares, whatever that is in acres, 500, maybe 500 acres grown at that time. But by the late 90s, it was up to 400 plus hectares and 1,000 acres. And then since that time, of course, it's got very popular, and particularly with the craft brewing industry involvement. And now we're sort of the NZ hops are about 750 hectares.
Yep.
And there's two other marketing groups involved in production in New Zealand as well. But so that's the potted history of the crop. It's hops were obviously not native of New Zealand. They were imported along with, they came over with the early settlers, particularly Europeans, and mainly from the United Kingdom. So they came in the 1800s, and so production started, I think the first commercial crop was in 1843, from what we understand. And that was here in the Nelson province, or where the hops are grown now. And but back in those times, of course, all the hops that were grown were not locally adapted. And so what we've done since then is we've basically started up a breeding program after the Second World War to look at ways of improving yields and also the quality of the product. So that's where we've started off. We've crossed a lot of North American material with European material, and I can go into the details of that if you want, but I don't think it's really necessary. But it's so we're very lucky here. We don't have any pest and disease issues of any consequence. And so we've been able to concentrate in our breeding program on developing unique cultivars with really good, what we consider really good flavors. And it's still a small industry by New Zealand standards. It's about 1% of the world's crop is produced here in New Zealand. And so it was taken off. And we've actually decided that we wanted our uniquenesses in the genetics, if you like. We have a lot of material from around the world, and we've used our expertise to sort of develop unique cultivars by we've actually doubled the chromosome number of some of the parents and used them to hybridize with normal chromosome number hops and come up with what we call triploids, seedless triploids. So that's our sort of claim to fame, if you like. And that's really been the hallmark of our program is the seedless triploids. So since then, we've developed a lot of cultivars. Over 20 cultivars have been developed since the Second World War. And I've been happy to say that I've been part of quite a few of them. So it's been a great career for me. I've enjoyed every minute of it. I love coming to work, even though I'm been working in science for 50 years, it's still a pleasure for me to come out every day and work with and meet with my colleagues and have a good discussion about hops and sort of move the program forward.
Yeah, you picked the right division of the plant and food research. Getting to be in beer. Now, I'm glad you brought up kind of your uniqueness and what you've brought to the table with your breeding program, and I think that's a great place to kind of start here, because I was curious about that. I was curious why Nelson is so popular, and I figured that hops weren't native, and so you guys, it's not just your terroir, it's not just your climate, but it's the research and the work you've done in breeding, like what that you've just taught me, triploid hops, which would be seedless, that sort of helped guide you down the path that New Zealand has been in.
And just to clarify, was it either your predecessors or your team that actually developed that technology in hops? Had that ever been done in hops before?
Yes, well, actually, it dates back to the UK. Some of the early breeders in hops have been from the United Kingdom, and at Y College in particular. And some of the early people developed the techniques to double the chromosome numbers. So my predecessors were the ones that went over there and learnt the techniques and brought that back to New Zealand. And whereas most other places in the world who grow hops and tried producing seedless triploids, they didn't really suit their particular climate or their particular production at that stage. But when they tried them here in New Zealand, they found that there was a lot of, it suited our climate. We've got a pretty unique climate. It's temperate oceanic climate, so it never gets super hot and in the summer, it never gets super cold in the winter, so to speak. So it's, and it's the right latitudes. We're about 41, 42 south of the equator, so it's about around about the Russian River Valley area in the States, and also across to New York, and right through Europe is sort of like in round about Rome latitudes. So yeah, so I guess my predecessors were, I don't take credit for the fact that about the developing of the triploid program. Since that time, of course, we've expanded it quite a lot and developed a lot of new or parental development in our program to create new triploid combinations. So yeah, it's a work in progress. Plant breeders never finish their what they do. If we breed the perfect cultivar, no one else would want to work in the crop again. So we can't have everything perfect.
So the other thing too, Matt, that Ron's probably missed out too is part of the plant food program. The predecessors, Dr. Rudy Roburg, also bred out black root rot disease, which was massive. You could only have your hop plants in the ground for a maximum of 3 years, often only 2, before you had to pull them back out again and replant them. And everything was all done by hand back then. So when would that have been, Ron?
Well, it was before the Second World War, when the root rot was in its raging, if you like. Actually, the hop they grew at that time was a hop called Californian Lake Cluster, and it was very well adapted to New Zealand in terms of its latitudes and yields, and it was good. But it was nicknamed Cali here, but it didn't have the resistance to the root rot, whereas the English material, which is very poorly adapted, did have resistance. And so the combination was to cross the genetics of the two producing areas at that time, so then North America and Europe. So a lot of that germplasm was used in our initial crossing. So, but most of our program has been spawned from those early days, and we've, as you know, the story around Nelson Sauvin is that's probably our most famous cultivar to date, anyway. And it was quite unique at the time because it was developed before the craft brewing industry really took off, and so we had all these strange tasting selections, and raising a glass like Matt's doing at the moment, and tasting these things and think, gosh, this one's pretty, it's got some unique grapey notes to it, and and of course people were wondering what to do with it, and so it was a forerunner really, and it took a bit of launching to get it underway. But once it was underway, it was people realised it was had some unique properties, and so off it went.
When it was first launched, Matt and Justin, Nelson Sauvin was basically at the commodity end of the hop scale. You know, when we were all as growers growing commodity hops, we had to produce yield and quantity for us to pay our bills. If we didn't get the yield with that, then the hop variety wasn't really a flyer. So we were one of the very first to grow Nelson Sauvin. And I never forget as a kid when I walked into the shed, I walked up there and I said, "Shit, Dad, what is this? Has a cat gone and pissed in the corner or something like that?" What friggin' stunk. My goodness, it was bad. Because, you know, we weren't used to that. And anyway, so
it's a terrible story.
No, but you know, it was well and truly a hop ahead of its time, and that's sort of what the breeding has brought about here in New Zealand. So as growers, it took us a long time to get used to it. We pulled our first Nelson Sauvin out after about 4 or 5 years because you simply can't get the yield off it of what you can your commodity hops. You know, your commodity hops, we were looking down 3,000 kilograms a hectare. Well, Nelson Sauvin, you're struggling to get 1,800 consistently. So, you know, if you're matching price on price, as a farmer, we couldn't physically afford to grow it. So until it got recognised by brewers with how unique and off the planet weasel piss it smelt like and tasted like, you know, it worked. But as growers, we couldn't afford to follow that track until we knew that the market would follow it. So.
Okay, so just to take a step back, because as a brewer, I'm just so curious about the origins of these things. So you mentioned the Russian River Valley and that the latitude is very similar, you know, to the Nelson region. And then it's far south of now Yakima and the Willamette Valley, also far south of Hallertau and some of the other famous regions. So is it safe to say that most of those cultivars, if they were moved to other places in the planet, besides the fact that they weren't bred for that pest resistance, are they somehow bred to deal with a little different light cycle, or do you deal with that in other ways? In other words, is there something special about your hops that they do perform well at these somewhat not ideal daylight hours?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. As I said, the Kelly cultivar that was we used as the cornerstone of our breeding program, if you like.
Which was the California cluster?
Lake cluster, yeah. And you would know, Matt, that the history of that one is sort of, you know, they're still not too sure just exactly where it came from. You know, it's probably got some European ancestry as well as North American ancestry in it, in the lake cluster. So, but you know that whether it was this clone that came from the Russian River Valley or what it was, but anyway, it was well adapted to. Whereas the English and the German cultivars, as you point out, Matt, you know, they're way north in terms of latitude, and they're not robust at all. I think you find that as breeding of hops anywhere in the world now, I mean, the hops are a lot more adapted. Like for example, Cascade is a hop that was selected up around, you know, in the north, you know, Pacific Northwest, way higher latitudes than what we have. But that one is widely grown around the world, so it's not unique to particular latitude bands, if you like. I'm not too sure whether I'm answering your question or not, but I mean, to me, it's you know, we've selected them right here. Our cultivars have been selected at 41, 42 south, but they'll certainly grow elsewhere in New Zealand and probably in the world if we let them.
So, man,
out of our country.
I think what you're wanting to know is, can we take Nelson Sauvin and grow them anywhere in the world? I think, but the idea, like Dr. Ron just pointed on, you know, the Cascade variety is probably your best study to do it on, because worldwide it's been put into different breeding programs as a mother plant or whatever it has. And typically in New Zealand, it has changed so much in the 30 or 40 years it's been in our growing environment that we've renamed it Taiheke, because it's off the chart like a completely different cultivar. So it's obviously adapted to the climate, adapted to our growing systems, how we grow it. We've got higher alpha betas, we've got high yield, we've got higher oils and everything come with it. So if you put that in front of all the other cascades, that's where you get your fairest thing. But was it back in the late 70s, early 80s, they had a major plant swap around the world between the breeding groups between Germany, England, America and New Zealand and Australia. And that was the last major plant swap that happened that made people increase their breeding stocks. So in that time, the likes of New Zealand shipped over several different varieties. Alpha Aroma was one of them, which is now called Rakel here in New Zealand. And that I know has grown up in sort of over New York way. I think they're trying to grow that there and it doesn't grow at all well. So, there are things that grow well in what we consider this utopia of New Zealand, but there's certainly other things that won't.
I think another thing to mention is the fact that we don't have pests and diseases like other countries have got. So we don't select ours for any of those issues. So when some of these hops are grown elsewhere, when they have been grown elsewhere, they don't perform very well, probably because they're susceptible to powdery and downy mildew and other diseases as well. So, but we don't have those in New Zealand. So that's our economic advantage, I guess, if you like. So, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah,
is that question, Matt?
something else that you mentioned that I kind of wanted to key in on before I forget. One, you mentioned that Nelson, when you went into the kiln room, Brent, and it smelled like, cat pee on a Christmas tree or however you described it. It's often how people describe Citra here in the United States, which probably repulsed the first couple of brewers who smelled it thinking they were going to make a lager beer with it. And then later it took some stroke of brilliance that somebody figured out it made a great IPA, and then everything takes off like wildfire. But I think another curiosity that myself as a brewer and other brewers have is, there's a very unique New Zealand aroma, and you liken it to maybe a little bit of the cat pee on that thiol side, but a lot of people describe it similar to Sauv Blanc, and some of the best Sauv Blanc grapes in the world are also grown very close to where you grow the hops. And I mean, as a scientist, Ron, is there any link to that? Is there, we love to talk about terroir, we love to talk about this, especially with grape varietals and maybe a lesser extent to hops, but you hear this word thrown around. And I mean, there's a lot of times where I'm given a beer and I can't tell you which variety is specific. Maybe it is Nelson or something, but there is a unique, New Zealand, maybe it's specific to Nelson, but there's a specific aroma there that seems to only come from your area.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, Matt, in a roundabout way I can answer it, but I guess it's the uniqueness of our germplasm that we've used. We've used specific North American cultivars and we've used specific European cultivars in our breeding program, and the combinations of those, they obviously with our parental development work, we're honing in on ones with sort of unique characteristics for our breeding program. So you cross those parents, and nowhere else in the world have got those. So I guess to answer your question, it's probably in the genetics. And that it's they are unique, and to New Zealand that is, and I guess we pride ourselves on the fact we are different, because I can't see that New Zealand can, the industry can't compete with the America or Germany or other countries just on sheer size, because we've got to have some point of difference, and we've got this phrase called hops with the difference, and I've given talks at conferences and we've used that in our marketing splurge and all that sort of stuff. And so it's I think without being specific, certainly the thiol side of things is quite interesting for us now. I've been asked lots of questions about the thiol contents of New Zealand hops, and it's actually even that's quite a complex subject in itself, Matt. You'll be well aware of that. And we've got Scott Janish he's written that book about, and a lot of it's about thiols, and he talks in that book a lot about New Zealand hops and the uniqueness and the combination, the synergistic effects they have on other or on beers, basically, in combination, not necessarily only with New Zealand hops, but with other hops as well. So I think New Zealand hops and American hops actually seem to play quite well together. And some of the more interesting beers that I've tasted here in New Zealand, I haven't had the experience of tasting too many in the States, but some of the best hops that I've tasted have been blends of, using New Zealand hops alongside American hops. So it's, I don't want to appear to be anti-America here.
Well, I feel that probably that work was born out of necessity, because for the longest time, at least, I'll just speak for myself, I couldn't get my hands on enough New Zealand hops to use them 100% in any one of my beers until recently. So we always had to get really kind of crafty in our way of blending to kind of weave them into our beers. But anyway, I feel like, that Nelson kind of set everything apart initially. And just to clarify, you had a hand in breeding that hop?
Yes, I did. Yeah, that's one of my babies.
I love this.
I just want to clarify that,
And Walker and also Maute Wika, some of my babies too.
And Nectaron, of
Wow.
course, the new Nectaron. So,
and now Nectaron.
Yeah, so
That's a famous lineup.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm very proud of what we've been able to achieve here. And when I say we, it's the hop team that I work with here, and also the industry people too, the growers and the brewers. We're actually very close, and NZ Hops, in terms of the marketing arm too, we work very closely with them, and we've had a research meeting last week with Brent and Lauren attended, and we're talking about the way we should be working towards the future, and what sort of the presentation of data and things like that. So yeah, it's pretty seamless, which I think is really good, and that's one thing I've been able to hopefully achieve in my science career is I realise that the pathway to market is so important with our research. You can have the world's best plant breeder, but if they haven't got that link to industry, it's not going to go too far. So, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to develop that, not only with New Zealand, the NZ hops here, but in terms of the marketing arm and the growers here, but also people like yourself, Matt, over in the States. You and I have had conversations before, and I recall the first time I met you, in fact, was at the Brewers Guild of New Zealand. You were the chief judge, and a few years ago, and you got up at the end of it, and you won me over by saying that you guys here in New Zealand, you should be using New Zealand hops more than what you are, and you had a graph up there, and you were talking about New World hops, I think it was, and you're saying here's America have got New World hops, and New Zealand's got New World hops, and you guys, you should be using more of those New Zealand hops. So you had me one over there.
Nice.
Good job. I wanted to focus in too on something that you've discussed here, which is about that unique aroma quality of these hops. And Matt, I was going to ask the question of these guys, because to me, the aroma of Nelson is so unique, and all of the New Zealand hops, but I didn't notice it very much till recently, to be honest. So my question was initially going to be how has it evolved to get that way? But it sounds to me, I'm sure there has been some evolution, but Matt, you made this great point. You could never get enough of them for it to be a focus of the beer. And now New Zealand hops are so popular, especially here where I'm at in the Bay Area. We buy every craft beer that somebody makes with New Zealand hops in it, because me and my staff here just love those characteristics. They're now getting, even though it's still such a small yield comparatively that y'all have, they're now getting enough of those hops that they can be showcased in our craft beers. And so to me, even though I've known about Nelson Sauvin for 15 years, I'm experiencing it in an all new way. I was never really able to experience the hops like we are now. So I think I just wanted to put a point on that it's this great point you make, Matt, that we're now just finally, at least some of us, able to get them in enough quantities to showcase this.
And maybe this is a good segue over to you, Brent, because I also feel that, it's hard when hops are scarce. Sometimes the first time we're introduced to a hop, that hop might not have been picked in its optimal window, because that hop was picked for a different brewer for a different purpose. I'm not saying it was a bad hop, but every brewer seems to have to find their way to, am I a early, mid, or late harvest window brewer for this particular hop? And I mean, I was going to say, maybe we can talk about Nelson specifically, but really I don't want to just stay on that one hop. As a grower, and as your family has kind of followed some of this breeding activity, tell us a little bit about what it's like to grow these hops. And yeah, we've had some wonderful conversations about picking window and how critical that is to how these hops play in the brewery. So maybe you can kind of take it that direction.
Yeah, well, so we can take it back a little bit further. So we're always going to be a small industry, and so we have to create hops with a difference so we become noticeable. We're also a very, very capital expensive industry to be a part of. So, there's very few people who remember what it was like 10, 15, 20 years ago as a hop grower. As a hop grower, you were struggling to buy a new tractor the following year. I think it was with the period between the 80s and the 90s, over 100,000 acres of hops got pulled out worldwide. That's generations of American farmers, of German farmers, English farmers, New Zealand farmers. At the peak, there were 66 hop farmers here in New Zealand. We got down to a low of 17. Now, when we were down at a low of 17, that was when I figured out, well, let's give this hop growing kind of thing a crack. And I had people ask me, many people from around the world, Matt, said, geez, you really do have bloody rocks in your head, don't you, kid? And but I thought, no, there's got to be something. We've got to dig ourselves out of the hole here. And, we had farms that were on the precipice of folding every single year. So it was a very, very tough time to live through. So, when you get given a new variety that comes into the system, you have to learn how to grow that variety. And growing that variety takes a few hits on yield, or it takes a few hits of leaving that in the cool store for a year or two because no one's heard about it, or no one has brewed with it before, or no one wants to. But I mean, the whole craft brew phase that started for us was an amazing craze for it. It did rescue hop growing worldwide. And we take our hats off to every craft brewer who has helped us create our craft better so you guys can have a better craft. And in doing so, it's helped us push boundaries. Well, okay, yes, this brewer does prefer that later stuff. And, you may be on a phone call to a brewer, or like you're at harvest time, Matt, and I'm saying, I'm going to hold on another couple more days, Matt, that the plant's collapsing around me, but I can just see the hops just turning brilliantly. And you're going in the background, shit, I hope he's right.
I think so many of us learned that it's not a beauty contest, right? That, in order to, maybe the whole IPA and craft world has created a whole new, we push hard for aroma, not necessarily alpha. And when you would have picked the hop at its peak for its bittering potential, and it would have won the beauty contest on the table, it's nowhere near ripe enough to perform well as a dry hop. And yeah, I've had you must have seen through just, your career so far, a huge shift in that focus on harvest window.
Oh, most certainly. Yeah, I mean, you could let's say get away with it back in the generic times of producing the bulk commodity hops, because, as you say, you're focused on alpha or beta. We had contracts that were stipulating if you do not reach this amount of alpha, you will not be in the top tier of the contracts. Now, often that can be related to soil type. So your soil type or terroir with inside a variety, if you have it growing on clay soil versus sandy soil, then you can get different characteristics out of those hop varieties. Same variety, it may only be the matter of 10 minutes drive apart, or a field that's on the furthest corner of your farm. So we've now learnt, we're learning and still continue learning, and we always will, especially as these new varieties come on. Okay, what soil type does it suit better to? Are we wanting a free draining, sandy, silty loam, or are we wanting a clay-based soil that's going to hold our plant that bit longer so we can increase a little bit more oils, or we can, slight manipulations like that, and that's how pinpoint we're getting. On our farm, we're growing 19 varieties on over 2 farms. We bought our new farm about 5 years ago now, and it's one of the heaviest clay soils in our region. Whereas on our home farm, we're right next to the Maute Wika River, and where the breeding plant here is, you can actually pretty much throw a stone and hit our hop chute across the river. So very similar soils to here, but we now know what suits that soil type to the soil type that's only 10 minutes drive away. And that's really quite important for us programming harvest windows, what our clients are going to want. I mean, I was on the digger first thing this morning, I was pulling out Nelson Sauvin, and you guys go, what the hell are you pulling out Nelson Sauvin?
No.
What the hell are you doing?
And the reason for that is purely because Nelson Sauvin in our area it gets highly affected by mites. So we can be dropping 30 to 40% of our crop from mite damage. But the problem is the mite can collapse the hop too early, and all of a sudden we shift our harvest window by 3 or 4 days too early, and we don't get the right product to you guys. So that's how pinpoint. Sure, we could sell the shit out of Nelson Sauvin, but in the back of my mind, I'm going, I don't care. I'm not here just to sell the crap out of anything. I'm here for you guys to get what you really want out of that hop. So yeah, if it's got to go, it's got to go.
But on the positive side, you've got Nelson Sauvin on your heavier soil up the Mercury, and it's doing exceedingly well. So that's as the crow flies, it's only about 10 kilometres away.
Mhm.
So that's what we find. So the clay soils that we're finding here in New Zealand can really hold back, if we have any mite issues or anything like that, which is often quite rare, but we spend a lot of money on predator mites and things like that. We avoid spraying our crop at the very, very last resort. So I think we've sprayed once in the last 3 years, and that was only about 2 hectares out of 100. So that's the
Very
big
unique.
tag, that New Zealand hops is really trying to achieve. And let's say that field that we're pulling out, we probably would have lost about $15,000 a hectare over 4 hectares. What's that? 60 odd grand a hectare. We lost by not spraying. But to keep our spray free tag and releasing predators after predators to try and eat those mites, that's just what the customer wants, really. So that's what we're trying to do.
I remember when I first asked a New Zealand farmer about that once. I don't know if it was on a show or not, but I asked, do you guys have organic, farming in New Zealand? And the answer was, yeah, we just call that farming. Like we just farm.
Yeah.
I think it's all organic because we don't have, these main problems. I was lucky enough to get to visit for 2020 harvest. My friends at the new farm there at Hop Revolution invited me out. So I got to see harvest. But I remember even looking at I had to get my passport to come into New Zealand. And, they're like, you can't bring your dirty camping gear. You can't bring your dirty hiking boots. You can't bring these things. It's a very protected environment that you folks are now very lucky to have. So I appreciate how well you guys have been able to do this over the decades. I can see how as you just said, it's very much a last resort to go to anything that's not sort of a natural process. I wish the whole world could be so lucky.
So to give you an idea on that, Justin, so for to release our predators, it's around $600 a hectare per time we do it. We're now getting to the point that we're releasing those predators on hop leaves. So they're growing the predators on those hop leaves with a few mites. They've got to have food, and then we go and walk them out to the hops and we release them from the hops that way. If you take that to the easy option of taking a spray, it's about $180 to $200. So it's probably a third of the cost, and you're getting an instant kill, but that's not what we're trying to achieve. So, and look, we still are a farming system, so we have weeds that we've got to contend with. So we still use our burn-off sprays to singe off the weeds, but then we also have a very good sprayer, and it's called sheep. So, and those sheep do a lot of work for us in terms of cleaning up our crop and cleaning up our weeds and tasting bloody good on your belly.
Yeah, because there's a joke in there somewhere that I'm just going to leave alone. But cheap, very
watch yourself. No New Zealand sheep jokes, please.
And then I was going to ask what the predators that you're actually releasing. Ladybugs and the like, or what else is there?
No, Persimmilus is the main one that we can release. So we're lucky in this environment. So Persimmons, they can eat up to 50 two-spotted mites a day in optimum for them, but persimmons will stop working. They'll go back into their cave underneath the leaf once temperatures hit about 27, 28 degrees Celsius. But then once you get to that temperature, then the mites really start to accelerate in the two spot. So it's a very, very fine line when we do add these mites, the persimmons, to take over these guys. You've got to enter them into the crop with a food source so that they can go on there and eat them. And timing is absolutely critical. Whereas in the States, it's too hot. The Yakima Valley would very much struggle using the persimmons as a mite fighting control or biocontrol. But yeah, ladybugs are handy, but persimmons is by far the most aggressive two-spot mite eater. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, because I know that some of the meat of this conversation, I want to make sure we leave enough time for it. I wanted to jump into hop varieties themselves. We've really focused on Nelson right now, and rightly so. It's the rock star hop, but we've also mentioned a few of the others. Maute Wika is one. It's also a region that you've mentioned for anybody who doesn't know that. Riwaka, and I know that there's some others too. So I wanted to give you guys a chance to, and I know Matt has some questions about specific ones. Matt, I'm drinking maybe we could start here because I'm drinking the Propagator Series Gen 5 Hazy Double, and you've got some New Zealand hops in here, right? What's in this one?
So Gen 5 is a beer. It's a recipe that it transforms every year. And this year, Sam used our Hazy IPA yeast, and because it was available and he couldn't resist, he snuck some Riwaka into what was supposed to be an established dry hop recipe. So that's the twist in that one. But maybe our biggest release this year, and where I feel like we learned the most, is Luponic Distortion this year. And it was really the major focus of the contracts that we signed and some of the activity around New Zealand hops. And there we did a blend. And honestly, I kind of came into that blend not understanding or knowing the hops as well as I do today. But we did that basically by rubbing on a table and creating something that was pleasing there, doing some single hop trials in our pilot brewery, but quickly trying to form a blend. And that ended up being Nelson, Nectaron, Riwaka, and Maute Wika, with Nectaron being kind of the feature, big player in that blend.
Well, that's a good combination.
Yeah. And I would have to say that, so those are kind of four hops that have been kind of top on our radar. Each is very different in my opinion. So I don't know where to start, but we've already talked about Nelson a little bit. So maybe we can start with Riwaka because it maybe was a predecessor. I know it's very difficult to grow, and maybe you can give us a little bit of the background on that hop, since so many brewers are so excited about that hop. And I don't know if it's just because they can't get it or because it's so expressive in beer. I think it's both, but maybe you both can tell us a little bit, one about its origin,
sure.
and also about growing it.
Yeah, well, it was born in 1985, to give you a precise year, and it was it struggled to start off with. We selected it 2 years later. I can remember selecting the plant, in fact, out in the field and rubbing it and realizing, my God, this one's got some. It's very rich in oils, and it's got a really neat Riwaka smell to it, if you like, and so it's quite unique. And we selected it, and it was eventually put into a beer which was made by Monteith's. It was a craft brewing place here in New Zealand at the time, and it was brought out by Dominion Breweries. Anyway, they produced a festive beer with Riwaka, and it was at that time it was absolutely sensational. We're talking about the 1990s by then, because even though it was born in 1985, it takes quite a few years to get through all the various trials that we subject them to. And so that hop eventually made it out the other end. It hasn't got a classic aroma profile. If you go by the German standards of noble aroma, You know, a blind man can see that it hasn't got the profile of a German noble aroma cultivar. So but it's unique. And that's, as I said earlier on, that's what we pride ourselves on. We don't want to be in other people's space. You know, that's their space, but we want to be in our space. And so that's when Real Walker was first born. It's got, you know, I consider it to have very, you know, it's big on citrus. And you might have some other points too, Matt, or my colleagues here, but I mean, it is quite unique. It's probably the most unique cultivar outside of Nelson's Haven that we've produced, and now with Nectaron coming along, they're the three that are really, really different. If you want something
before we go to Nectaron, I do want to cover, because I've heard from Matt just mentioned it, and I've heard from so many of my New Zealand friends about how hard it is to grow. And I guess I was curious about that. And I know that hops are selected for the opposite reasons. You want yield, you want them to be able to grow. Yet this one still survives. It's because because it's a great hop. So I don't know, Brent, can talk to us about why it's hard to grow, and if it's so hard, why is it still around?
Yeah, well, I look at things as a challenge, Justin. So we had Real Walker come onto our joint venture farm, which we farm with our local iwi group, local Maori organisation. So we brought it on because we realised, and as Matt said, you know, he in Luponic Distortion, he tried 4 different New Zealand hops and they're all unique, you know, and that's what we want. We want unique, and we want brewers to be able to use certain hops and then use the gold dust on top, which is what we're hoping is our New Zealand hops. It may not look like a rock star on page, but when you get it into a beer, you're like, holy shit, you know, this is really adding gunpowder to the ammunition, you know. So that's been the breeding line. But Real Walker, it's a very poor root structure as it forms. So I've spent the last, now 11 years tracking right from fields right out to the plant. I've tagged those plants, I've monitored them right through propagation, right through growing, right through the whole system, so that we can try and get the whole sort of breeding with plants or propagating from plants that have got that little bit more X factor that can sustain you know, certain environmental impacts that we're now facing as farmers. So I feel like the last 2 years I'm kind of cracking it. And what was it? Not last year, because we got smashed with the hail, but the year before, we produced the largest yield that's ever been seen off Real Walker. So yeah, we're starting to win the battle there, and it's through what we're doing on farm. You know, out of those over the 4 or 6 mother plants that I've selected from out of 10,000 plants, that we're now up to 6,000 of those plants, and hopefully we can keep that line going. And all of a sudden, we've got a plant that is much more capable of handling the weather diversities and the poor root structure and all that formation. On our home farm, we've now had a propagation facility, a glasshouse facility, for about 5 years now, and we take it right back to the field. In the morning, I go out with our guys every day of propagation from about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and we go and take cuttings of 20, 30 odd thousand cuttings. Now, in that row, there may be 200 plants in our hop row. I may only select 20 or 30 of those plants out of that 200 because I like the form of it, I like the way it grows, I like the structure of it, how it's shaped. So I'm not going out there and taking every single cutting, because that's what we need to do to keep the shed crew growing. We're specifically getting these ones into the system because we know that they've got vigor, and that's for every variety. So one thing we've noticed on our new farm, we had the luxury of being able to do that sort of system. So, you know, we get hop growers, we get non-hop growers driving past our new farm. They say to us, you know, how do you get everything so balanced and so even? And we're just like, well, it starts right from the start. You've got to produce that good plant. I actually bought a plant here to show you, because that's actually what we're doing right now. So that there, we don't do root cuttings. That's what we produce there. It's a hop crown, we call that. So we're wanting root structure, and we're wanting, if you can see the buds and nodes appear on the top there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we're after. So that's a fine line. Out of, let's say, if we were to put 10 plants into a pot, at deep potting time, we may have 7 of them that we call first grade, a couple that we won't bother with, and one of them that we might just try again. So yeah, we're refining it that much that we want the best quality plant material to go on our field. So we've got no excuses. If we stuff up, it's our fault, not the plant's fault. So,
Right.
yeah.
And would you say that Riwaka then is better grown in the sandy or in the clay soils there?
Definitely in the sandier soils. Riwaka is a very much a late training window plant, so it will come out of the ground probably about 6 weeks after any other variety. So in your clay soils, you're generally wanting a plant that comes away a bit quicker. When you've got clay soils, they're brilliant in wintertime because they keep it cooler, but you get a more consistent growth. So your growth pattern on a clay soil sort of goes like this, and then it buttons off. Your sandy soils go like this, and then they go up in a big spike. Now that's your growth spike there. But when you're growing hops, you're wanting to stack on all those little wee plant leaf, the leaf nodes and the branch spacings, because inside them, that's where your branches come out. Where your branches come out is where your hops are. If they accelerate too quickly, then you have less branches, less hops. So, you know, you'll see people going, oh my gosh, my hops just grew like a foot a day. It's like, yeah, no, not a good idea, team. So, you know, you're wanting to slow that down, but you're not wanting to slow it down too much. If you slow it down too much, then potentially it won't get over to the top, bend over, shut its sac flow off so it puts its arms out and grows a crop. So it's a very fine line. And, you know, the likes of the time I've spent in Yakima and things like that, they've got a much more user-friendly growing environment because shit, it's just sunny the whole time.
Right,
You know,
yeah.
it's like growing in a glass house, whereas at home, you know, in our growing season, we can have 2 days of constant rain and have 4 to 5 inches over that time. You know, well, that's 2/3 of Yakima's whole yearly rainfall. So we've got to balance our soil systems with our varieties, with everything. So we've got a lot more of a fruit bowl that we've got to select from when we're doing these things. So
Okay.
yeah.
That brings up a good point. So Yakima, for those of the listeners who don't know, has to be 100% under irrigation, or it just doesn't work. It's just too arid throughout the entire summer growing season. Now they got the advantage of more sunny days, but they really are reliant on irrigation. The Willamette Valley, you know, I don't know for sure, maybe these days more than, maybe the majority of it is under irrigation, but traditionally you could actually grow hops there and rely on some rainfall. And certainly in Germany, maybe only 50% of the crop is under irrigation. How is it there in New Zealand? Is everything under irrigation?
We're all under irrigation. Dad was one of the first people to bring irrigation into our system, into the New Zealand growing system. That would have been back probably early 60s, I think. So yeah, and that was all about shifting mobile, you know, movable pipes and everything like that, all around the hop garden. We have championed the overhead irrigation system because it means that we can, you know, water our cover crops in between, so we keep a really good growing environment for our plants. The drip tube we've kind of sort of shied away from. We are of the adage that if you've got if you've got a more spread even pattern of irrigation, then your plants just keep on filtering out. And people got to remember, when you're talking about a plant, it feeds from the roots. You know, so if you haven't got a good root cluster going out and saying, oh, I'll pick that cherry there and that cucumber there and that piece of meat there, you know, you've got to pick everything out of the soil for it to grow properly. You know, and if it's not looking good on top, you can guarantee it's not looking good down below. So we don't just grow that strip of where our hop plants grow. We make sure we concentrate on growing the whole, you know, sward of where we're growing our things. So yeah, we're very much overhead irrigation. There's been quite a bit more drip tube sneak into the systems over here now, which is fine. That's no problem at all. People can fertigate like that and put them in the systems. Also, it avoids sort of wind and factors like that. But to give you an idea, the Maute Wika area has got probably one of the best underground aquifers in the whole of New Zealand. The water is just crystal clear. It's amazing. Flows down from our hills only a few kilometres and it's hit the sea. So it's really quite amazing soil. Now we're only going down to 18 to 20 feet, and we're pulling up, you know, some of the most pristine water to water our hops with. It's pretty neat.
Being a California brewer, that almost brings a tear to my eye to think about.
Then we go, you know, to our Mercury clays, and we've got one of the deepest wells in the Mercury clay, because when you're talking about soil types, Mercury clays like that, it's like putting key, plates on top of each other. So for that water to seep through down into the aquifers, it's a long way down. So one of our bores is over 1,200 feet deep. So yeah, I think we're tapping on Middle Earth down there somewhere. So,
yeah, you are. I was at Middle Earth when I was there.
And water is the next goal. You know, any agricultural, farming system around the world is what is needed to keep crops growing and everything like that. And as we grow these crops to for a larger population that we're growing for, people are seeking efficiencies and sufficiency out of water, how we use it, are we watering it right, you know, are we overwatering things, and it's something we try to pride ourselves on too, is our conservation of things like that. We want to make sure what the crop needs it gets, but we don't want to overdo it either. So,
well, let's switch to another hop variety, and I'm just going down the list on the Luponic can here. So before we get to Nectaron, I want to talk about Maute Wika, which I think is a completely different hop from a brewer's perspective, and one that I have to admit, when I was in New Zealand rubbing hops, well, really, there wasn't anything I didn't like, and Maute Wika really showed well on the table, and I probably had a little more difficulty integrating it by itself. It seems to be a great blending hop for us. In fact, in this blend, it worked out marvelously. And I know we're doing some trial work here coming up shortly, where Sam at the Propagator is going to brew some lager beer with Maute Wika. But I wondered what, you know, between, you know, Lauren, your opinion, what you hear from brewers, and maybe Brent on the growing side, educate us a little bit on that hop. Yeah, what are brewers saying that you talk to about that hop, and where are they finding a best niche for that hop, maybe?
Yeah, I think an interesting place to start is how it's used in the breeding program, and how it is used as kind of a control almost in the brewery here when they're brewing with the trial hops, because it's nobody dislikes it. Everybody comes back to it, and it kind of like realigns your palate in terms of the New Zealand hop profile, and you can just come back to it, realign. There's some really nice ripe citrus notes that I think would go really well, and most brewers that have used it go really well in lagers, in hop forward style lagers. And yeah, it's likable for everyone. And I think that's the best feedback. I think a lot of brewers have the same opinion as you. It's hard to fit it as a single hop in your brands, but that it complements everything so well, and it really allows other hops to shine, and it can push forward flavors that you might have not seen before.
That makes sense to me perfectly, because you know, I think a lot of us, again, I'll go back a couple of years where we just couldn't get our hands on, you know, the New Zealand hop. So any New Zealand hop we get our hand on, we'd gladly take it on. And then of course we wanted it to fit into our IPA program. And, you know, maybe some of these hops aren't tuned perfectly, or maybe it's all about intensity level. It's just not as intense. It doesn't stand out like a Waka or a Nectaron or a Nelson, but it's just such a pretty hop, especially when you rub it on the table. I mean, I just fall in love with it every time. And so Sam is going to do a lager beer, kind of a summer lager beer with Maute Wika, and he's very pumped about it. Of course, I was like, well, save it for our IPAs. He's like, no, we're blowing the lager beers. How is it to grow, Brent? I mean, in terms
of growing, it's one of the major varieties that you know if you've got it wrong. So this year particularly, you know, we had in our growing season, we had less sunshine hours, very noticeably less sunshine hours. So being a front of season harvested crop, you know, you're always wanting to push that button to get going, because if you don't, then further on down the track, you might miss another variety. What I was very proud of this year was, you know, our group of growers in the cooperative, there was a lot of phone calling. Oh man, we would have started Maute Wika, 4 or 5 days ago, this time last year or the year before. And I said, but it's just not ready. It's just not right. And normally you're out in the paddock and you give it that good rub and that good smell, and when it's ready. So we had one field there that we normally would harvest around about the 5th or 6th of March. We left right through to the 10th of March. So that's quite a difference. The pinnacle of getting your hops exactly right out in your field is by waiting those extra days. You think, oh, what's 5 days? Well, 5 days is massive. When you're getting to the top of that curve to get everything bang on right. I'll go out, this year was particularly hard to get everything bang on. I questioned myself, pretty much didn't sleep the whole hop harvest. It was great. And because you'd go out to the field and you go, but what I'm seeing on my dry matter test or my oil test isn't what I'm rubbing or smelling. I'm not going to believe the tests. I'm actually going to believe my nose on this, and I'm going to look at the plant and I'm going to say, is it nearly collapsing around it? Is it looking green? Can it keep going? And I'd question myself, and I'd go back out at the end of the day and go, shit, am I too deep, sleep deprived to actually realise what I'm looking at here? Or is the numbers not stacking up? I'm going, no, it's not ready. But that's one variety that's very specific to that. If you harvest too early, particularly, you will not get the aromas or the profiles come through of what people are looking for.
It reminds me.
The Maute Wika has been used quite a lot in the fresh hop beers too. It's one of the more popular hops to use. So it's it comes off earlier, it's harvested early, and they can put it in their beers earlier and all that sort of stuff. So it's actually quite a versatile hop, I'd say.
Yeah.
And as you rightly point out, Matt, if you're using it in lagers, it's probably going to come out pretty good, I'd say.
Yeah, it shines. Yeah.
Good for pilsners too. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about your baby, or at least your latest and greatest, Nectaron. And
Is Nectaron named after Dr. Ron? Is that why it's
Yes.
Nectaron? I thought I was being stupid, but that's awesome. I love that.
Not entirely.
He only got the asking of the name, like usual.
When it came up, they never told me what they were going to call it. You see, they said, "Well, we want to use part of your name in the this new cultivar," and we're talking about 18 months ago. And that's and I didn't think anything more of it until it was named. So, but anyway, I've got the T-shirt to prove it. So there you go. So it's
I have the can to prove it here. We did a Nectaron single hop.
That's out of the Propagator Series, Matt. Is that what that was? Your Nectaron single hop? Firestone.
I mean, it's brewed in Paso Robles, but it's inspired by and originally brewed at the Propagator. So we do all of our trial brewing there, and then we bring the recipes up here to Paso Robles. And it's funny. This is another one where part of the story of spending some time with you both was, well, it was still an experimental number. Do we talk about those numbers? We can talk about those.
Still port 99 or port
4337. Yeah.
But it's actually a full sister of the cultivar Waimea, which was released in 2012. Now, if you think back when Nectaron was born, if you like, with Waimea, and it was crossed in 2004, to give you an idea of the time frame. So it takes a while to prove these things, but the Waimea was fast-tracked because at that time they wanted a high alpha replacement cultivar. So that the emphasis was put on that. But we realised this one had a pretty good agronomics, and didn't have the alpha, but we knew it had some pretty unique properties. So we just kept it in the wings, if you like, and we've been using it in our pilot brewing plant, where we actually purchased a little pilot brewing plant in 2014, and Nectaron was one of the first selections that came through there that stood out, and it was and I haven't tasted the bad beer of Nectaron since then. Mind you, I'm a bit biased, I know, but it's got that wonderful tropical fruit flavors, pineapple and mangoes and all sorts of other things.
Yeah, very ripe mango, ripe jammy, peach at harvest. pineapple. Yeah, it's beautiful across the board. Once it comes in, when it's in the field in Brent's fields, once it comes in as bales, and then once it's in a brew, you're like, this is special.
Dr. Ron and I actually got quite a bit of trouble for that because I was being out here at the hop nursery out at Plant Food, and I was with one of the other staff, Donna here, who does a lot of the things out in the field, and we were over at the nursery. I said, Donna, what are these pots of hops doing over here? And she said, oh, they've been there for 2 years now. We might throw them out. And I said, well, what are they? Oh, they're a new cultivar. And I said, okay, well, let's try them. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, I'll just pull some hops out at home and we'll put these in. And she said, oh, okay, let's talk to Ron. So we rang up Dr. Ron, and he came out here and he pulled out two of the crosses for me. He said, right, Brent, this is you and me. We're not going to tell anyone about this. And
this is not going live, is it?
we got wrapped on the knuckles pretty hard. That about 6 months later, but a few years later, you have Nectaron, and that's where we when you know you've got a variety that's waiting in the wings that you need to try, the problem is propagating it up to a level where people can use it. We've taken it from 70 odd plants through to 4,000 plants to 100,000 plants, and worked that way up. So
I know it stood out right from the start, really, as an agronomic plant, and it came through the machine harvesting really well. And as soon as we got onto Brent's place on the ground property, it was pretty obvious that it was going to be a winner. It was just a matter of stepping it through some brewing trials, which we've been doing for many years, of course, since then. So, but it started off in New Zealand. One of the first people to do the brewing trials is a little brewery in Rotorua, of all places, in New Zealand, called Crouch's Brewing. And this guy was, where we sponsor an award at the annual Brewers Guild of New Zealand. And one of the awards is that we sponsor is a sort of a new it was, I think it's a new product sort of area, which is featuring hops, obviously. And so we, part of that prize was to give the hops to the winner, and that was happened to be Crouch's Brewing. And so that was one of the first brews. There's been other people that have used it, obviously, since, and it's surprising now, and it's quite good for me personally to go around New Zealand and at the moment and see all the different breweries here that are using it, and including our local ones, the Sprig and Fern, and also just down the road here there's a little brewery, Hop Federation, which is this one here, and also one in town here called Townsend's, and so they're all using Nectaron now, so it's kind of nice to see it being rolled out so quickly. But I think it had a good start, and it's sort of been one of those things. It was in the right place at the right time, and initially probably it wasn't in the right place because they weren't after alpha acids of 10 to 12%. They were after sort of 16 plus, which Waimea had, but it was we kept it.
It describes a breeding program to a T. That's 17 years ago. You have to think that far ahead. You've got to think prior to that of what you're going to breed to get to that point. And that's where we currently are now. When we talk about our things, when we get together with Ron and our breeding group, it's like, right, what are we going to produce that's going to be different, and what brewers are going to look for in 15 to 20 years time, or 10 years. We're trying to get it down to 10 or 12 years before we can start getting it out, but it's time. And is the palette going to be, it's a real get the dartboard out going, right, we're going to hit that, and we're going to see if people are going to want.
No, it's more scientific than that.
So from my perspective, obviously the hop was bred, or a lot of the work was done before there was even such a thing as a hazy IPA, or at least it wasn't a worldwide craze. And we initially deployed this into hazy IPA, and that's what we've been focused on the most up to this point. But I'm now really curious, or maybe you can tell me, have some brewers had better or worse success with West Coast IPA, with pale ales, or like if you had to say today, and obviously, we're only a short amount of time in on this hop, where do you think it's best, or where is it best fit
Lauren will answer that. She's our knowledge base.
Yeah, that's why I was asking.
I think it's already seen so much success in hazies, but also in West Coast and pales. And I think it will find its feet personally in West Coast or pales. But it's so well-rounded that you it's up to the hop itself and where brewers are putting it. I think we've seen a few dry hopped pilsners with it, so you never know, right?
Yeah, I have to admit that after we brewed with it for a while, I'm just going to compare it to Nelson because people are so familiar with that flavor profile, where Nelson has that high thiol, a lot of the Sauv Blanc character, a lot of like just the classic New Zealand top note. Nectaron brings in the base a little bit, and when I say that, it has some qualities that are familiar to me from some of the American cultivars, like Citra even. So I do think it fits into hazies, but I think it is a West Coast hop as well.
I think so too, yeah.
So what you'll find too, Matt, is brewers are coming back to us saying, oh man, we've added this in with Simcoe, we've added it in with Citra or something like that, and it brings something else out in those hops.
Yeah.
And that's one thing we're not an industry who's saying, oh, only use that hop. This is the beer you'll make, only use it. We actually want to make other hops from around the world sing, as well as our own. So if we can pull out notes that other people are finding in other beer, well, not finding out of those hops, but they put our hops into that beer and finding it, and it's a win-win for everyone. It's win-win for brewers and for the other hop growers. So it's not just all about what our hops personally do, it's what can our hops do to pull some other characteristics out of other growing hops around the world. So.
And it's a very thoughtful way to think about it. And it just encompasses the challenges that you face with being able to grow the amount of hops that people want, the desires that you have to have these hops that stand out. And it's a very well-planned and thoughtful approach that you're trying to make. Let's think about the rest of the hops that everybody can get and how ours mix in with that. I really am impressed by that, listening to you guys talk about it today.
Yeah, I mean, you go to the supermarket yourself, and to make the ingredients of a cake, you don't just pick one thing, do you? So
yeah,
we're just trying to make that cake nice and big, and so everyone get really fat on. And it feeds down the system. So the hop farming community is a very small community worldwide. It may not seem like it to some people, but it really is. Especially when you talk about generational farms as you go down the system, and it's just really neat to see everyone do well, and brewers do very well out of it too. So
one point, just like to make you talk about different selections of things. We've got in behind Nectaron, which is the latest release. Of course, we've got a whole swag of other selections coming through, which we can't name at the moment. But this is the tip of the iceberg, if you like, in terms of our production is coming up. So the prospects are going to be really good for American brewers to tap into more good rock stars coming forth.
I think
from New Zealand. Yeah,
Matt, was it 3 or 4 years that you were down here, and we came out here to plant food, and we opened up the chiller and poured out several different bags, and you're like, okay, I've got to increase my luggage content. It's just, we've got some real bangers in there. And, the original name that we gave for Nectaron was wow, because that was everyone's perception. As soon as they smelled it, I was like, wow, what is this?
Nice.
And that's what we're trying to get out of all of our varieties. It may not be on paper the most standout, but we want people to actually go, there's something special in this. So,
sure.
Well, I actually learned quite a bit in our hour here or more. And there's a bunch of additional varieties that I would love to get through, but how are we doing? Justin, are we wrapping it up here soon?
Yeah, we are wrapping it up soon. So I was kind of going to give us the option here, Matt. And look, it's your show. I'm just your patsy over here. I thought we could either talk about maybe one more like experimental variety. They don't have to tell us what it is, but something they're excited about. Or, I just realized you guys just finished harvest a couple months ago, and we haven't even talked about that. So I thought we could either go like, what does this year's yield look like? Maybe we can cover both if that'll be quick.
Well, actually, you make a really good point, and Brent you were, unfortunately we couldn't make it to visit during harvest or do selection on site, but I got to live a little bit of this through FaceTime with you. And it was a particularly challenging year, at least for your farm. Maybe you could just let us know a little bit about how that went, and what were some of the mountain peaks and valleys in this crazy year, on top of COVID and everything else.
Yeah.
Well, this year should have been quite a good celebration because, even though my nana has died, she would have been 100 this year. And she was a lady who spent her whole life on the farm, and she was quite amazing. But yeah, Boxing Day, 26th of December, we got absolutely smashed with quite a hailstorm. And it's the worst in the history of our area. And it lasts for about 40 minutes. So normally hailstorms are more direct, or they pass over pretty quick. We saw this one coming and just thought, oh bugger. And I actually raced inside to get my camera because I like my sort of photography, and I was trying to catch all of this lightning in the background, and we saw a tornado form over another spot, and which was only about several hundred meters away from us. So it got pretty wild there. We basically in that 40 minutes lost over half our crop. So yeah, it was
unbelievable.
Tough year for our family, but luckily as the cooperative, we're spread over 60, 80 miles of area. So there was probably about 30 of that area was hit quite bad. It dropped our yields in terms of the New Zealand hop yields by, I don't know, probably 20%, Lauren? 20%. Yeah. Unfortunately, most of that was on our farm. But it was very interesting to see because the triggers, no one's ever gone through it before of that amount of hail. So to see what plant triggers, it couldn't have come at a worse time, to be honest. Like to that day was very bad because the hops, aren't either over the top, or they're nowhere near it, or not quite there. So you've set your crop. If you can't set it from there, you're stuffed. So we pushed our hops a hell of a long way. We didn't want to bury our heads in the sand. We thought, nah, stuff it. We need to keep these growing along quite healthy. So there was about 8 fields there that we'd completely written off. And we thought, oh, well, we'll just see what we can do here. And we managed to turn it around. Now, we didn't turn that around with sprays or synthetics or anything like that. We actually turned that around with a lot of fish oils, natural products that, you've got to imagine, I speak of hops as being like humans. So if we go and cut ourselves pretty bad, one of the first things I do is drive about 2 or 3 Ks down the road and I go and walk in the sea. The sea is one of the best healing places to heal anything. So what happens when your plants are scarred and everything like that? Throw them seed products. So algae-based products, whether it's fish or seaweed-based products, they were basically like a band-aid that went on the crop. And that turned it around from those 8 fields to only 2 fields that we didn't harvest economically yields. So it was a challenge that Mother Nature gave to us, and we thought, well, stuff here, we'll show you what we can do. And
good job. What a tough guy. Not just the timing of it in your harvest, but like, oh, hey, don't worry, a year of a pandemic and then the hailstorm of the century. Sure, why not all at once? Like you're still smiling, and what a resilient thing to do.
Yeah, no, and we do it because we love it, Justin. At the end of the day, your wallet gets pretty heavily nailed. We're going to be a few years behind now, but that's just farming life, and that's what we sign up for. But the industry, as we've got here, the cooperative that we have, we may only be 1% of the world production, but all of that 1% binded into Tapawera area had a better yield, so their production offlaid what we couldn't produce. It's not as if we didn't go out there and say, oh, we don't want to produce this, so let's not produce it. We have some pretty big hurdles. 3 years ago, we had 2 cyclones that our area's never seen before, and that, so we're finding all this climate change stuff. Yeah, it's hitting home pretty hard, and we've got to learn to live around with it. And
What about the overall yield for your region? Would you say that we're on par? Would you say we've grown a little bit? What do you think?
Generally, the industry is growing quite a bit. this year, because of the hail in Brent's farm, it got knocked down a little bit, but otherwise it would have been an absolute bumper crop of a year. It was
Wow.
beautiful. Yeah.
So
Ironically, yeah, after the hailstorm, we had a pretty good autumn, really. It was,
Yeah.
or late summer, I should say. But it was
generally, Justin, yes, area is increasing here in New Zealand. There's a couple of other farms that are going ahead and putting more area in. They're concentrating on sort of your Maute Wikas, your Nelson Sovereigns, your Rewalkers, and a couple of outliers. So and area is increasing, and investments coming more from outside investment in terms of more corporate style farms. So the general family farms that we have available here are nearly tapped out with land and expenses and costs over the last 5 to 7 years of trying to ramp up to meet brewer demand, basically. So we're trying, and we've tried a lot, and
Good.
The banks have been our friends for a good few years now.
Well, that you know that the demand is there. I mean, the American brewers are just, so that's of course why we're sort of asking it here at the end, because American brewers want to know that they could get more. You know what? I'm sure New Zealand brewers want to know that they can get more too at this point. So,
well, I always think it's an important thing to hear about the trials and tribulations on the farm, because maybe some of us brewers take for granted that these raw materials just kind of show up on our doorstep, and if we pay a little bit more, maybe we can get more or something like that. But just like all the challenges in a brewery, all those things exist on the farm and all the way through kind of the raw material chain. And I just, I'm always amazed. I go out on the hop farm, and especially with you, Brent, I just see someone who's just as passionate about farming hops as myself and so many brewers are about making beer, and the connections between the farm and the brewery. I mean, I think the more that brewers go out and interface with growers, breeders, see these things in the field, they get a better feel for the challenges that are out there. And boy, I'm convinced it's much easier to be a brewer than a farmer. That's for sure. I figured one thing I've figured out since I become a brewer. And I always say the longer you're a brewer, the more farmers you meet and the more respect you have for what it takes to get those hops and the other raw materials to the brewery in good shape for our brewing.
And I think we'll probably look back on history, Matt, and everyone knows that the last 18 months, 2 years absolutely sucks for everyone, no matter who you are and what industry you're in. And it's really, hopefully, it's not going to change the way humans think about each other and things like that. But, the social media side of things, we're getting out there a bit more, showing people what are happening on farms. Farmers aren't used to taking a camera out and, videoing what they're doing or things like that. But we're having to learn to do that, to actually show people, okay, this is what's happening on our farms at the moment. We've had this event, and this is what's happening. But it's more portraying the truth of what's going behind what was considered a bit of an iron curtain. No, this is the only product you get. No, we want to show you what's really going on, and it's really neat that you're engaged and we're engaged with our final product and the consumers. If you look at the hop and the beer industry, there are very few industries worldwide like it, that we've got a product that's produced right from the scientists through to the growers, through to the brewers, through to the consumers. We're all linked, and we all are equally as passionate about it, I believe. So that's pretty
so critical.
Well,
okay, so I'm sorry, I know we're almost out of time, but I have one more question to kind of end this on an intriguing note for our brewer listeners is, and there's no right or wrong here, so just you can throw it out, but I look at the list of New Zealand hops, and there's all these crazy names. Half of them I have a hard time kind of pronouncing, and certainly I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around all of them. We talked about some of the top kind of contenders that most of us are familiar with. What are one or two of the varieties that are grown, Ron, that you've bred, Lauren, that you talk to other brewers about, that we maybe don't know so much about, or are on your short list of you've got to try this New Zealand hop? It's not getting enough attention.
I think the one that's in my pocket when I brew is Whitey. I really love that hop. Southern Cross also. Just all around beautiful hops that are like, I love these. I don't know, nobody else really knows that much about them, but they're amazing. And the same about Maute Wika. It's a rock star.
Probably Mercury is another one that stands out. It's the one that was released in 2015. Their Matt, and that's one. That's,
what's it called? What was the name?
Mouteri, Mouteri.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's a Maori name, obviously. So it's anyway. That's an area where the hops are grown. That's where Brent's other farmers, and it's we've had a tradition of naming the new cultivars after areas, and that's got an interesting history in itself because it was originally called Brooklyn, and I think there's a brewery in New York City that actually we're not very happy about. In fact, we're going to call it that. So
Sounds about
anyway, so it was quite an interesting debate that I tell quite a few stories about that whole scenario around Brooklyn versus Mercury, and they've actually produced a beers here in New Zealand called was it no stop till Mercury.
Yeah.
Nice. Yes. Yeah.
So so it's Mercury is one it's very high alpha hop, but it's also very interesting oil profile, and it's could be used quite extensively, I think, in dry hopping areas as well. It's got some unique flavors. So that's some of them. That's some of the older cultivars are still kicking around, but they're quite well known, I think. One that hasn't has sort of been increasing popularity in the last decade has been Rakau, Rakau, and that's one that wasn't widely grown, but it became quite obvious that it had some really interesting brewing properties. So it's, that's another one that we could mention.
And Brent,
anyway.
what's your favorite variety to grow?
Whole favorite variety to grow. I think.
Watch it.
My ones are the challenging ones. What can you actually take from something that's absolutely on the rubbish heap to actually turn around? So, Brew Walker is my love-hate relationship, big time. When you actually get the Rewalker plant growing, it is a stunning shaped plant. Like it's if you could picture a beautiful looking hop, that's what it is. But it's getting it to that point, which look, you lose your hair. So yeah, that's a very interesting one. The Nectaron is becoming quite fun because we've been able to control the base of where we've gotten our plant parent material from, and we're starting off at the top shelf, which is really cool. So we're really hitting the ground running with some really good quality material. But as Ron said, Mercury, the last 15, 20 years, we've been so busy as growers growing things, and as a grower cooperative, we haven't known how to release varieties. So the Mercury was a variety that really didn't get released at all to the world that well. And I go into the field and I rub it, and I'm hit with bubble gum or something like that in my face. It's like, it's so unique and it's so resiny that it blocks our belts all the time. The amount of oils and resins in the thing. So it's a neat variety. But
you haven't answered Matt's question. What's your favourite?
My favourite would probably actually be Wakatu, which is the old New Zealand Hallertau, which is an aroma-based hop. It grows very nicely, trains well, it's very easy, and I could go for a surf that day, if I want to have an easy hop to grow and just head off to the beach.
There it is. Yeah. There's that Kiwi attitude I've been waiting to hear. I mean, you guys, this whole time talk about all your hard work, and I'm just thinking, God, you're just making me feel so lazy. Because everyone just thinks Kiwis just go surfing all day, but there it is right there. Nice, easy hop to grow, so you can go have a surf.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to thank everybody for being here and being part of the show. Lauren, thank you for helping us put this together and being our liaison. Dr. Ron, congratulations on 50 years. And yeah, it's a really big deal. And I think that at least our viewers and our listeners have learned that, they knew you and they didn't know you. You've had such a hand in these hops that we like. So it's really cool to talk to you and hear about that. And Brent, boy, do I wish you an easier life in this next harvest. I hope that, the storms subside for a year. I don't know what, just give you just a little break so you can have a more chill, 2021. Of course, we all hope for that, but it sounds like you had a rough season, and it's just, you still got a smile on your face. It's good to see,
Yeah. Matt's going to come down and hopefully help us this year anyway.
Yes.
There we go. Well,
Absolutely.
look, and if you need help promoting, like you mentioned, I really only require a place to park a Volkswagen bus and lay my head, and I will shoot video, I will take photo, I will spread the word for you guys.
Sounds good.
Amazing.
Sounds good.
Matt, well, I think we did a good job getting through as much as we could here. Like I said, this is kind of everybody's favorite hops right now. So good job getting this info.
Yeah, it was
out there.
amazing. And like I said, this is the podcast end all podcast. 'Cause whoever just get awesome hop people on a podcast. I mean,
That's right.
it was amazing.
Brent even called his shot in his email reply to me. He was like, "Oh, sure, we'll be there to make the best podcast ever made in the history of podcasts." And I was like, "Great, good to go." All right. Well,
everyone, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Great talking.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
you got it. Thanks for being here. Have fun in New Zealand where things are laid back and easy, and I hope to see you there soon. Thanks to our listeners for tuning in for another episode of the Beer Before Glory podcast. We will be back with more. I believe we're covering even more hops on the next episode. But thanks for tuning in and sticking with us, and we'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves and your beer.